Hey guys, it's Sam, and this is my spoiler-free review of The Black Prism by Brent Weeks. This is the first book in an adult fantasy series, and it follows two main perspectives, although there are a number of different POVs in the story. The magic system in this world involves light and being able to take different kinds of colors out of the light spectrum and use those for basically anything, and how powerful a person is determined by what kind of color they can wield and how many colors they can wield. And in this story, Gavin, our main character, is the prism, which means that he is in a place of importance within this like magical government because he can use every type of color and it doesn't exhaust him or burn him out the way that it does for other people. He kind of has like unlimited power, but at one point in a 7-year interval, he will just die, but other magic users, if they use their magic too much, end up kind of burning out and turning into what they call their color white, where they almost become like animalistic and monstrous and no longer in control of themselves. Besides Gavin, we also have Kip, who is a 14-year-old boy in one of these sort of like backwater villages, and his area is being conquered by a man who's claiming himself to be a king, even though there are no kings in this world, and he is fighting back against the like magical government that Gavin is a part of. And during the takeover of the town, Kip discovers that he has some kind of magical ability that he never really knew he had, and so his path kind of collides him with Gavin's path, and everything kind of goes from there. And again, we follow multiple different perspectives, not just those two, so we do get more of a complete picture of the world, but those are the two people who we follow the most. So first off, we talk about the world building. Like I mentioned with the magic, I kind of found the magic, although it is kind of cool with like the, you know, the color spectrum and everything, I found it was kind of hard to follow. You get very much dropped into the world and the magic system in particular, which I don't tend to like completely mind with stories, but with this, I just found it kind of hard to find my bearings. I felt like I wasn't able to fully picture and conceptualize the magic until like halfway to 3/4 of the way through the book. But I did really like the like magical government system. We don't get a ton of like how exactly it works, but there's just different ways that this government kind of works and different figures within this government. I found that interesting, and we also get the history of it. We do get flashbacks to kind of when Gavin did rise to power and sort of some of the unrest and things that happen and how it's been since then. And all of that is really interesting to kind of put a lens on the world. Next, we talk about our characters. So as far as characters, I both loved some of them and hated some of them. So Kip as a character is really frustrating. I just find him annoying. Teenage boys are not my favorite in general anyway, so maybe he's acting kind of realistic, but at the same time he just doesn't really use any kind of sense, and he also just like is very hard on himself in a way that makes me feel like the narration is really hard on him. The language in here is incredibly fat-phobic. I've mentioned this in every single place that I've talked about this book because it was so beating you over the head with how fat-phobic it was. So Kip is a fat character, and there's so much focus on his fatness throughout the story about how he can't fit in things and he's lazy and he can't run and he's a failure and all this stuff. And not to mention that, but also there's side characters that are mentioned as fat, and side characters don't even have names. So like just like passing characters, they'll be described as like fat leviathans, like all of these like really horrible descriptors for people. So the narrative itself is incredibly fat phobic, and there's so much focus on fatness as being like wrong, disgusting, lazy, a source of failure, all this stuff that just was completely unnecessary. Like we could have had a character who is a fat character that does have some self-esteem issues. I'm not saying that's not realistic, but you don't need to beat us over the head with it like throughout the story, because that pulled me out of the story so much and made times that I was with Kip so annoying. Not to mention that he also is in typical teenage boy fashion, but also I don't need to hear about it all the time. He's so focused on like looking at women's bodies and noticing their like nipples, and just like I get that that's how boys think, but also like it makes me hate you, like just for you to be this way. Also, Kip, he discovers his magic like early on in the story, and I felt like he is sort of like a male version of a Mary Sue, where whenever he does have some kind of challenge that has to do with magic, it's just like way too easy, and it's really annoying because it's not like we get any training sequences. And I can have a character who has like innate genetic ability, that's fine, but that only can take a character so far, and I feel like Kip is given much more leeway than a character should. Next we have Gavin though, who I loved. So Gavin is just like an interesting character through and through, and throughout the story you get to see that things with him aren't quite as they seem, and his history, like I mentioned with like the history before he came into power, and what he's been doing since then, and just this character is so complex and morally complex. He is morally great, I'd say, but also like he's a morally great character that doesn't feel like an asshole and that you can like genuinely root for, and he's just so interesting because of like the choices that he makes and the corners that he gets backed into and the things that he's trying to do, and it just, I love him. I just love him. And I really enjoy the characters that he surrounds himself with as well. There's like different like friends that he has and different people that are like part of the military like structure that he's friends with that are just also like cool characters that I like seeing. I will say that the female characters are not super well done in the story. So the narrative and the world building says that female characters are inherently more powerful than men because they can see a broader spectrum of the light, and so they're more naturally going to be gifted at magic. However, they don't really show a lot of like women being magical badasses and in power and in places of power like you'd think they'd be if they were these like great magic users, you know? Like, we are told this, but then we aren't really, like, shown them to be in these places. Like, it's not like it really affects a lot about the world. So there are a couple of characters that I do really like, particularly Karis, who's one of the female characters, and she is depicted as a badass, but the women still have, like, somehow this, like, lack of agency that is really irritating when the story's telling me, like, oh, they're so powerful, but, like, they don't have a lot of control over their lives or any agency, or just kind of like pulled around by the other characters, and I don't love that. Hope that improves, because I do really like Karis. Last thing I'll talk about the plot. This is very much like an introduction to the story, a foundation building book. I know so many fantasy books are like that as far as fantasy series, but this one is so like that. I almost feel like this is like the beginning part, like prologue of a book more than anything. It's just like a lot of setup. We're setting up and discovering things about the world, about the magic, and putting characters into places so that that can be explored throughout the whole rest of the series. Like, it just doesn't feel like a lot does happen, but like, it definitely just feels like, oh, this is set up for like the actual things that are going to matter a lot. There's a lot of things that are revealed at the very end in particular that are just like, that have me really interested and just to follow and see what happens there. So there were a lot of like twists and things at the end that gripped me a bit more as far as wanting to continue with the series. I am cautiously optimistic. I've heard some mixed things about the series before I even read it. People love it, some people really don't like it. I'm not sure if the things that I want to improve really will improve, but I like Gavin in particular enough to continue, but I might not finish it. We'll see how the next book in the series goes. I end up giving the Black Prism 3 out of 5 stars. I will be doing a spoilery discussion for this book, so I'll link that on the screen. If you have read this, go ahead and check that out and discuss more about the details of this book with me. Comment down below, let me know your thoughts on the Black Prism. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye.